Have you ever wondered, what if one day you left it all behind, the crowded streets, the bright lights, the hurried sounds of life, and went to a place where time passed more slowly? A place where there were no ringing phones, no busy schedules, just silence, just nature, and just you. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story about a man who lived by a peaceful lake where the night breeze whispered across the water and the stars above watched over the traveler's every step. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let yourself drift along with my voice into a world where everything is quiet, where the story unfolds slowly, like small waves rolling across the lake. Under the dim moonlight, there was a small village deep in the valley, where the night wind gently blew through the treetops, carrying the gentle scent of wild grass and damp soil. There was a man named Elias, living alone in an old wooden house, right next to the peaceful lake. Elias was no longer young, but not too old either. His face was gentle. His deep eyes seemed to have witnessed a lifetime of storms, but also filled with peace. Every night, he had a special habit. When darkness gradually covered the village, Elias lit a small oil lamp, then sat by the window, looking out at the calm lake, where the stars were reflected. He slowly poured a cup of tea, lightly inhaled the faint fragrance, and then told a story. His story was not about anyone in particular, nor did it have any dramatic developments. It was just old memories, gentle things that he had experienced in his life, told in a deep, steady voice, like the rhythm of the waves. Back then, when he was a young man, Elias lived in a crowded city where the streets were always bustling with people. He worked in a small bookstore where the wooden shelves were filled with books that had turned yellow over the years. He liked to touch the pages, liked to turn each page, to feel the gentle scent of old books, as if there was something familiar and peaceful in each word. But then one day, he decided to leave. There was no incident, no sadness. It was just that one early morning, when the first rays of sunlight crept through the window, Elias realized that he longed for something else. A place where time passed more slowly, where every day began with the chirping of birds and ended with stories told by the light of an oil lamp. So he came here, to this small village by the shore of this peaceful lake. As the years passed, he lived a simple life. Every morning, he woke up when the sun had just risen, walked around the lake, listening to the sounds of nature. He planted a small garden where there were fragrant flower beds and an old apple tree that provided gentle shade. On summer nights, when the gentle breeze blew through the window, Elias would sit on the porch, close his eyes, and listen to the chirping of crickets. He did not feel lonely, nor did he feel regretful. There was only serenity, as if he had found what he had always been looking for. Tonight, the sky was still clear, filled with tiny stars twinkling like diamonds scattered across the black velvet. The wind blew through the distant forest, creating a gentle rustling sound like a lullaby of nature. Elias sat there, his eyes following the moonlight reflected on the lake, as quiet as a still painting. But there was something strange. Far away, on the opposite shore of the lake, where a small path led into the village, the light from a lamp was flickering. A lone traveler was walking slowly on that path. A long cloak covered his body, and on his shoulder was a small bag, as if he had traveled a long way to get here. Elias watched that figure, not in a hurry, not surprised. He just took a sip of tea, letting the warm aroma spread in his chest, then quietly waited. A few minutes later, the sound of light footsteps on the dry leaves echoed in front of the house. The traveler stopped at the wooden gate, hesitated for a moment, then knocked very softly. Elias put down his teacup, slowly stood up, and opened the door. The traveler was a young girl. She was no longer young enough to be called a child, but not old enough for her eyes to be filled with weariness. There was something about her face that reminded Elias of himself years ago, a quiet searching, an unspoken wish.
Can I stay here for the night?
Her voice was as light as a breeze. Her eyes held a hint of shyness. Elias smiled, stepping back to let her in.
It's cold tonight. Would you like a cup of tea?
The girl nodded, then sat down on a wooden chair near the fireplace. The fire crackled, giving off a gentle warmth. Elias took another cup, pouring her tea. She took it, her two small hands wrapped around the cup, as if to transmit the warmth into her palms.
Where do you come from?
The girl was silent for a moment, as if considering her answer. Then, with a vague smile, she said,
I come from a very far place, a noisy and crowded city. I have traveled along very far, just to find a place where I can stop without worrying.
Elias nodded, not asking any more questions, because he understood. He had been her, had spent days wandering among tall buildings, had longed for something nameless. The two of them sat there in silence. The fire in the stove burned slowly, the light dancing on the wooden walls, drawing strange shapes. After a while, Elias slowly said,
Do you want to hear a story?
The girl looked at him, her eyes shining with surprise, then nodded. Elias took a deep breath, then began to tell. A gentle story about the old days, about the wind carrying the scent of wild flowers, about a road with no destination, but full of beautiful things along the way. And so the story continues to flow in the quiet night. Outside, the lake is still peaceful, quietly listening. The fire in the fireplace crackled softly, its soft orange light covering the old wooden walls. The young girl held her cup of tea in her hands, quietly listening to every word Elias told. His voice was deep and slow, like flowing water, carrying distant memories of peaceful days. His story was about a traveler, a man who spent his life traveling through vast fields, dense forests, and trails covered with fallen leaves. He was not looking for anything in particular. He simply traveled because he believed that there was somewhere where his heart would feel like it belonged. The girl listened, her eyes shining with thought. When Elias paused to take a sip of tea, she softly said,
So in the end, did the traveler find the place where he belonged?
Elias put down his cup of tea, looked into the fire for a moment, and then smiled.
No one knows. Maybe he found it. Maybe he's still on the way. But what matters is not the destination, but what he sees along the way.
The girl was silent, her eyes distant. Then, very softly, she said,
I understand.
Elias did not ask her what she understood. He just sat there, waiting patiently. After a moment, the girl looked up, looking straight into his eyes.
I was a traveler once too, but I don't know what I'm looking for. I only know that I can't stay in the same place anymore.
Elias nodded. He understood that feeling. The feeling of souls on a journey to find themselves. Outside, the night wind blew gently through the trees, carrying the scent of wild grass and the steam from the lake. The small house was still warm in the firelight, and Elias's story was not over yet.
Do you want to stay here for a while?
The girl looked at him in surprise.
Stay.
Elias nodded slightly.
Only if you want to leave. This door will remain open.
The girl was silent for a long time. Then, with a slight smile, she said,
I think I will stay for a while.
Outside, the night was still peaceful, and the stars still shone quietly in the sky. The next few days, the girl stayed in the cabin by the lake. Every morning, as the sunlight filtered through the leaves, she woke to the sound of birds chirping outside the window. Elias had been up long ago, watering the vegetable beds behind the house, his hands slow and patient, as if each drop of water were a part of time. The girl stepped outside, took a deep breath, felt the fresh air and the scent of wild grass on the wind. This was a different pace of life, a pace she had never been used to. No honking cars, no rushing people, no crowded streets that made her feel lost. There was only the sound of the wind, the sound of the lake water lapping gently against the shore, and her footsteps leisurely on the soft ground.
Would you like to go for a walk?
Elias asked when she stood still looking at the lake. She nodded. They walked along the shore, where wildflowers stretched out in the sunlight. Elias didn't say much, just walked slowly, giving the girl time to observe. She saw bird prints in the damp sand, small ripples in the wind. She began to notice little things she hadn't noticed before: the color of the sky at dawn, the random shapes of the clouds, the soft sound of leaves falling to the ground.
How long have you lived here?
She asked.
So long.
Elias replied, his eyes shining with nostalgia.
So long that I can't remember where I've been before.
The girl was silent. Part of her admired him, a man who had found his place. Another part wondered, could she be like him? As the days passed, she grew accustomed to life here. She helped Elias tend the garden, picking ripe apples from the old tree. Every afternoon, they made tea together, sat on the porch, and quietly watched the sunset dye the lake red. She began to talk about her past days, about the city where she used to live, about the streets full of lights that always made her feel lonely. She told of the dreams she had, about the things she had lost along the way. Elias just listened, without judgment, without advice. He knew that everyone had their own journey, and sometimes all they needed was someone to listen. One night, as the oil lamp flickered in the room, the girl looked at Elias and asked,
Have you ever thought about leaving?
Elias looked at her, smiling.
No, because I have found a place where I belong.
Outside, the wind blew gently across the lake, carrying something vague like a message from afar, or an echo of roads not yet traveled, and the girl knew that one day she too would have to make her own choice. And so, the girl decided to stay, at least for a while, to listen to Elias' stories, to search for answers that she herself did not know, and perhaps to find a part of herself in the silence of this lakeside village. But is this her final stop? or just a temporary stop on the long journey ahead, the story is not over. And perhaps you are also wondering, what will happen next? If you want to continue this journey, click like and subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Because who knows, this story is not only about Elias or the girl, but also a part of your own story.